David, McAuliffe-Shepard, 35.
Good to go? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Appreciate it. A couple more people than I expected. That's not a bad thing. So my name is Mark Reinhold. So I'm giving a talk this evening called From Beast to Blockbuster, or Changing Views of Dinosaurs Through the Eyes of Popular Culture. So a little bit about myself, because you're probably wondering who is this guy. So I am actually a native of New Hampshire. I actually grew up in the Portsmouth area in Newington. Graduated high school there, went in the military after that for a few years. Earned my bachelor's degree from Keene State College in geology, went to the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, earned my master's in geology. And my wife and I have since moved back here to New Hampshire, where we now reside in Manchester. So the reason that I'm doing this particular talk, that image there shows you the book that kind of has inspired me for a pretty sizable chunk of my life. I remember checking this book out when I was probably like 6 or 7 at the local library, reading it many times over on the subject of dinosaurs. And the one thing that I've always found fascinating is that when you look at dinosaurs in any form of popular culture, whether it be movies or trading cards or books or whatever, we can see that there are many changes that have occurred over the years. And so I've always been like, well, why have these changes occurred? And this is tied back into the field of paleontology. So that's kind of where we're looking for that connection. Okay. So first thing we should make sure we are aware is what exactly is a dinosaur? This is a question you ask a lot of people, and most people are like, yeah, I know what a dinosaur is. Well, let's make sure we're all on the same page. Now, first things first, we're not talking about birds. And we do understand birds are ancestral. They're the ancestors of dinosaurs. But we're not thinking of those. They're recent. We don't like recent things. We like prehistoric stuff. So when we think about a dinosaur, we're only talking about those that lived before 65 million years ago. So there are a couple of criteria that we use to define what a dinosaur is. Number one, we look at the legs. Dinosaurs have what is referred to as a graviportal stance. What that means is that the legs are underneath the body. They're not out to the side, like a lizard or a crocodile, okay? Or I guess that's an alligator, whatever. Okay, but when you look at something like that, when the legs are out to the side, it's not very energy efficient. You know, you're gonna lift yourself up, and then you're gonna move around, and then you're gonna rest. With a dinosaur, the legs are underneath, the body's right over the legs themselves, nice and easy. Number two, when we are talking about a dinosaur, dinosaurs only lived on land, okay? When you look at the image here, we see a pterodactyl, not a dinosaur, because it lived in the air. We see a plesiosaur, not a dinosaur. It lived in the ocean, okay? Dinosaurs only lived on land. Dinosaurs are only terrestrial, okay? Number three, dinosaurs lived during the Mesozoic era. This is the time period between about 250 million years to about 65 million years. Okay, so that encompasses what are called the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. Okay. Now, there are a couple of other characteristics, okay? These first three are the ones I typically tell my students about, and they get that, but we also understand that dinosaurs are diapsids. When you look at the skull, you see that there are 2 holes behind the eye socket. That's a diapsid. That's a dinosaur. They're socket-toothed, okay? That means that over the course of their lifespan, they constantly replace their teeth, okay? How many of you have had your teeth replaced? Occasionally, right, you know, an implant or something, but generally speaking, you have 1 set of teeth, right? You got your adult teeth. Now you have baby teeth too. But once you get your adult teeth, that's it. Not so with a dinosaur. They constantly replace those over the course of life. Okay, and we also know that they lay eggs, so those also help us out. But when we're talking about dinosaurs, those are the criteria that we're trying to think about. Now, when we start to think a little bit about dinosaurs, we realize that our first impressions of them may not be really recent. There's a very good chance that when we start looking at ancient myths, dragons, that may have been partially inspired by dinosaurs. Okay? Many cultures that we see, if you look at the regions around them, we find that there are dinosaur deposits. So if you're the average Joe walking down the street, or down the pathway, and you see a dinosaur bone on the ground, what do you think? Oh my gosh, some giant creature must have lived there. It must be a dragon. Now, what's interesting about the idea of the dinosaur and the dragon is that there is an idea that, well, it's actually may predate that. There's some thinking, there's a book out there by David Jones, fascinating read, if you want something interesting to read, where David Jones talks about how the idea of the dragon may actually predate any form of civilization. It's very possible that the idea of the dragon originates from 3 of humans' original predators. Back before we were like the top dog, we were preyed upon by large cats. We were preyed upon by large birds. And we could have even been preyed upon by large reptiles. Well, when you look at a dragon, you can see elements of each one of those critters. So it's very possible that the dragon myth may have come from so far back that it actually came from instinct more than anything. And it's an interesting thing to think about. Okay? Now, when we look at different cultures, again, there are many cultures that have dragon myths, and so I like to look at 3 real fast here. Okay, we'll look at the Chinese cultures, medieval European culture, and then the Aztecs. Okay, when we're looking at Chinese culture, we find dragons are all over the place. Right, they're on pottery, they're on buildings, they're on clothing. Although usually, if you wanted to have a dinosaur, or say a dragon, on your clothing, you had to be royalty. Only the most special people could have dragons on their clothing. But the idea is that dragons are prominent throughout the dynasties of China. Dragons were good luck, right? They were good things. We like dragons, okay? But again, when we look at China, we find that there are numerous dinosaur deposits all throughout China, all the way up even into Mongolia. Okay, so it's very possible that the dinosaur myth could have been enhanced by the discovery of dinosaur bones. When we look at medieval Europe, okay, here's a very well-known painting, St. George and the Dragon. St. George is defeating a dragon, and the dragon that we see is very typical for the medieval European cultures. They looked at a dragon as something that liked to hoard gold, something that could fly through the air, something that would kidnap princesses. Right? Evil creatures, we don't like them. And a lot of medieval European cultures looked at them that way, okay? Another perception of them. Now, do we find dinosaur fossils in Europe? Absolutely. We find them in England, we find them in Spain, we find them in Italy, they're all over the place. So again, those bones, those fossils may have reinforced this idea. Lastly, we come all the way to North America and we look at the Aztecs. The Aztecs had a really big dragon in their culture called Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl was the bringer of winds, okay, the god of learning. So again, he was kind of a good one, okay? But we do find that there are definitely dinosaur fossils that are found in modern-day Mexico. So again, we have the myth, but then we have something that might just be reinforcing it. So it's an interesting way to look at it. Okay. And again, nice image of one of their images on one of their buildings. So where were the first actual identified dinosaurs found? Okay, so for that we got to look in southern England. Okay, the question of when were they found is a little more controversial. When we're actually looking at the first descriptions of dinosaurs, we look in the 1820s. But we can actually look a little bit further back in time and see individuals who were describing fossils, as it turns out, were actually dinosaurs. So we can actually go back into the 1600s. Robert Plot, the natural philosopher, and now Robert Plot was at Oxford University, wrote a book called The Natural History of Oxfordshire. And he described all the natural things that were going on in Oxfordshire. And one thing he described were these things that were called formed stones. Stones that looked kind of weird. They didn't look like a conventional rock. And these are some of the things that he observed. He observed coral. He observed ox teeth. He observed crystals of gypsum. One particular thing that he observed is in the center there. This. Now, when Robert Plott saw that, they didn't know about dinosaurs. And he looked at that and he said, you know, that looks kind of like the reproductive organ of a giant, or part of it certainly. And that's how it was interpreted. Now we know now when you look at it, we're actually looking at the bottom of a femur of a megalosaurus. You can see the two condyles on the bottom. You can see growth rings inside. This is definitely a dinosaur bone. But Robert Plott didn't know that, so he described it otherwise. So the first evidence we have of somebody describing something that would eventually be determined to be a dinosaur bone is, again, back in the 1670s.
Was the book written in 1676? Or
Yes. Yeah. Now, we go forward about 150 years into the 1820s, and this is where we see the first dinosaurs actually described. Now, here's the thing. The first dinosaurs that were described eventually were the iguanodon. The iguanodon was found in 1822. But we say that the megalosaur was the first dinosaur we know of. And the reason we say that is because whichever dinosaur got described first is the one that's going to get credit. That's how science works. You do it first, you get the credit. We found iguanodon in 1822, but Megalosaurus was described in 1824, before iguanodon was actually described. So the guy who found iguanodon kind of lost out. He could have had it, but it took his time. A little too much time, turns out. So the first dinosaur that was actually described is Megalosaur. Okay? And that was an image of one of the first Megalosaur fossils found. That was the jaw, obviously enough. The scale tells you how big this thing is. This is a foot long. This is a big bone that we're looking at here. And this is just the bottom jaw. Well, when William Buckland, who was a minister, found this, he described it, and he named it Megalosaur, meaning great lizard or giant lizard. And again, this was in 1824. The iguanodon was described the next year. Just missed it, 1825. Gideon Mantell found iguanodon fossils in 1822. There's actually some controversy as to whether he found them or it's possible that his wife found them. The story is that Gideon Mantell was a doctor, and he was out doing house calls one day. And while he's doing his house calls, his wife is wandering around the countryside, and she may have very well found the first iguanodon fossils. But we'll let people to figure out which one they want to work with. But they found them in 1822, and he finally described them in 1825. Now, what he noticed about them is that when he looked at the teeth of the iguanodon, is they looked kind of like the teeth of, well, an iguana. Makes sense, right? Because if you look at the name iguanodon, it actually means iguana tooth. The only thing is they were a lot bigger, much bigger than a conventional iguana. But that is described, that is accepted as the second described dinosaur. The third described dinosaur was 1832, also by Gideon Mantell. And he found this plate in a forest. Tilgate Forest, there we go. Now, to give you an idea for size, each of these is 1 centimeter. So this is a pretty big slab of rock that we're looking at here. And you can see all kinds of bones that are in there. You can see the vertebrae back here and all sorts of other bones in there as well. So Mantell found this, and he named the third dinosaur, Hylaeosaur. Okay? So we now have 3 different dinosaurs described. The only thing is nobody made the connection that these were all related. That comes a little bit further forward in time. We're going to go forward about 10 years. We move forward 10 years. In 1842, somebody finally coins the term dinosaur. Before this, we didn't have that. Okay, so Sir Richard Owen is an anatomist, he's a paleontologist, a general overall scientist. Okay, and he looked at the fossils of Iguanodon, Megalosaur, Ileosaur, and he recognized that their legs were very similar. He recognized that their vertebrae were very similar. And he's like, you know, it's almost as if they're all related. And so what he did is he put them all together into one group and coined the term dinosaur. Now,
I'm sorry, I don't want to digress too much, but so the dinosaur, Iguanodon, are these roots in Latin or Greek?
the names are always based in Latin. Yeah, they're always based in Latin, because Latin's a dead language, and it doesn't change, which is why we use Latin. Okay. So yes, good question. So when we look at the term dinosaur, this actually means fearfully great lizard. Now, today we typically say a dinosaur and we think terrible lizard, which isn't wrong. But the original definition was fearfully great lizard, because one thing you notice about each one of these dinosaurs, they were big. They were very big. Nothing like we could see on the planet at that time. So as a result, we come up with that term. So by 1842, we now have dinosaurs. That's awesome. Then they got to start working their way into popular culture. So where do we start seeing them in pop culture? Well, you go back far enough, what we find is that the first recognized dinosaurs in any form of pop culture actually comes before 1842. Actually comes in 1837. There's a painting, okay? This one right here by John Martin, and he was English. In 1837, he created the painting Iguanodon, the country of the Iguanodon, which includes an Iguanodon and a Megalosaur. Now, we still didn't know what these things look like, okay? So the interpretation was that a dinosaur was basically just a big lizard. So when you look at them, you can see, yeah, they're kind of like giant lizards. And that was our interpretation for quite some time. But this is the first time we see dinosaurs used in any form of popular culture and actually recognized as dinosaurs. As you can find evidence of dinosaurs beforehand, but we didn't know what a dinosaur was. So it took some time. But this is definitely a good one. Now, the one thing we should make sure we mention is every once in a while there is a pretty interesting discovery that influences our interpretation of dinosaurs. And this is a good one right here. In 1843, we find small dinosaurs. Okay? Megalosaur, Iguanodon, Ileosaur are all big. Okay, we're talking 20 feet long, several tons. So the interpretation is that all dinosaurs were big. Well, in 1843 rather, they found this fossils of this organism here, Iguanodon. Turns out it was pretty small, only 4 to 6 feet long. So pretty small by comparison. So we started to realize that dinosaurs weren't just big, dinosaurs could be small. And this really blew our minds, because it's like they take up their own little niches in their own ecosystems. This allows us to start to think about how we're going to reconstruct ancient ecosystems. This did it. So small dinosaurs. The first time we see the term dinosaur of any type used in literature was Charles Dickens. Now that's fascinating. I found this mind-boggling when I learned this. You think Charles Dickens, you think The Tale of Two Cities, right? You think Oliver Twist, Christmas Carol. You don't think about him using the term megalosaur, but he did. In 1851. Now Charles Dickens published a weekly manuscript, okay? He did all kinds of writings, other people contributed to, but he published it every week. And on the August 16th of 1851 issue, he wrote a short story called Our Phantom Ship on an Antediluvian Cruise. The cruise before the Great Flood. That's what it comes down to. And in that story, he wrote, his teeth look too decidedly carnivorous. A sort of crocodile, 30 feet long, with a big body, mounted on high, thick legs, is not likely to be friendly to our legs and bodies. Megalosaurus is his name, and doubtless greedy is his nature. Now, the thing is, you see that description, and this idea kind of propagated itself through time. People consistently thought that dinosaurs were these mean, greedy, violent creatures. We were say that's probably not the case. But Dickens didn't help our case out, let's be honest. Or Megalosaurus got a bad rap, I think. Anyways, but that's the first time we see a dinosaur used in any form of literature. 1851. So we're going to go back a little bit of time there. Dinosaur reconstructions. And we start to find more and more fossils of dinosaurs. And we start to think, okay, well, what do these things look like? Well, Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins in 1853 created sculptures of dinosaurs. The first time that this was done. He did this for the Crystal Palace display. The Crystal Palace was a big, monstrous construction made out of steel and glass that was created to show off all the technology, all the advanced technology of the day. Built in 1851. In 1853, it was taken down and moved to a park in London. When that happened, Hawkins built models of the dinosaurs that were known. So he built a megalosaur, a couple of iguanodons, and a hylaeosaur. This is based on the current interpretation of the time. A lot of times people look at this and like, what a bunch of morons. No, they're redoing these reconstructions based on what was known at the time. So it's not because of ignorance that they made them look like this. This is just what they knew. So we always want to be careful about that. But these are the first reconstructions made out of cement. And it's kind of hard to tell how big these are. If there was a person standing here, the person would be about that tall.
What?
That's how big these things are. Okay? And you can, obviously, you can still go see these today. They actually just repaired them recently because they were starting to get worn down. So, but yeah, these are actually, this is on my bucket list. Just so we're aware.
I just said, no trip.
So those are the first reconstructions that we know of. All right, another new discovery about dinosaurs. When you look at those past three there, you saw that all three of them were quadrupeds. They walk around on four legs. Well, in 1858, down in New Jersey, Joseph Leidy, who was a very well-known paleontologist of his day, found a almost completely full skeleton of a hadrosaur. And when he found the fossil of that hadrosaur, when he found the skeleton of that hadrosaur, he came to the realization that this thing wasn't quadrupedal, it was bipedal. This thing walked around on two legs. This completely blew our minds. And so this changed a lot of our perceptions. Because not too long afterward, in 1882, we found about 30 skeletons of an iguanodon, different iguanodons, mind you, in a mine in Belgium. And when we took all those pieces and put them all together, what did we realize? Iguanodons are bipedal. This is big. The other thing that we should note about this discovery here is that whenever an iguanodon was reconstructed, they found spikes on the fossils. And they always thought that those spikes, well, obviously they must be on the nose, like a rhinoceros. Well, what they figured out in 1882 is that that spike was actually on the thumb. They had thumb spikes, not nose spikes. Changed our view of the iguanodon. Not as much as being bipedal, but still significant. So finally, somebody reconstructed a full skeleton, as we interpreted it at the time. And again, it was, guess who? Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins again. He came over to the US, and he created a cast of a full skeleton of a hadrosaur. You can still see this on display at Drexel University. Originally, it was displayed at the Philadelphia Museum of Natural History, or Natural Sciences, rather. And so he made a full reconstruction of the hadrosaur, so we had a really good idea about what this thing looked like based on current knowledge. So that's kind of cool to think about. You can go see it today. It's kind of neat. I love this picture. This is a fascinating picture. This is an engraving by two gentlemen, Stablo and Monty. They were French. And what they did is they wanted to depict iguanodon in a modern environment. So they did. So they imagined what iguanodon would look like if it was in downtown Paris. They constructed it next to a building. Now this is a little exaggerated because iguanodons weren't quite that tall. They were big, but they weren't quite that big. But it's the first time we see somebody trying to put a dinosaur into a modern environment. As we move forward in time, we see that goes on a lot through history. Now we only see Godzilla destroying a city or a brontosaurus running rampant through a city, whatever. This is the first time we see this happen. Now we do note that this iguanodon rather, still has a nose spike. But this is only a couple of years after we figured out that they didn't have one. So they just hadn't got the message in. So it was coming. So, but there we go. '1890s. What do we see? We see humans and dinosaurs put together. Did humans and dinosaurs coexist?
No.
No, they did not. They're separated by a pretty sizable chunk of time. Well, Edward Tennyson Reed came up with a cartoon series. And in that cartoon series, he put dinosaurs and humans together. So he created a series called Prehistoric Peeps. This was published in Punch magazine out of London, okay? And what you can see is, again, you got your humans, but then you have dinosaurs as well. It's the first time we see it. Some say that this was the inspiration for the Flintstones. It's possible. You can kind of see where they're coming from. Maybe in early Flintstones, sure, why not? We'll get to the Flintstones in a bit. So by the year 1900, we know of quite a few different groups of dinosaurs. We know of about 160 different genera, including some very well-known ones. I mean, you probably recognize some of those names, right? I mean, who doesn't know Allosaurus? Right? Who doesn't know Triceratops, Brontosaurus? Come on. These are all familiar. Well, these are some of the ones that we had discovered and described by 1900. So we had a pretty sizable number of dinosaurs known by this point in time. And today we know of about 1,000 genera. So they're pretty prolific. 1901, we see this book. This is not the exact book, okay, just to be clear, this is a reprint. But Beyond the Great South Wall, written in 1901 by Frank Seville. And in this book, there's a dinosaur who plays one of the protagonists. There's a Brontosaurus excelsius, that goes after the party of explorers that climb over a great wall that's supposed to surround the Antarctic. And then here it comes. Interesting read, very interesting read. But this is the first time we see a dinosaur playing an important part in a story. We saw Dickens mention it. In this situation here, yeah, Brontosaurus gets a bigger role. It's the first time we see a significant role by a dinosaur. Gertie the dinosaur. It's the first animated dinosaur, 1913. Okay. Winsor McCay was a very well-known cartoonist from this time period. Did a lot of work. Drew for many magazines in New York. Okay, all the way up until he died in 1935 or 1936. He first made the attempt at drawing or animating rather, a dinosaur. So we created Gertie the dinosaur. Now this is about a 13-minute film. It's a silent film, okay? 4 topics. 13 minutes. Can you imagine how long it took to draw all that? This took an extremely long period. This was definitely a work of love. But he created Gertie, had Gertie do a whole bunch of different things, harassing woolly mammoths, eating trees, obeying commands. It's interesting. Look it up on YouTube. It's a neat little movie. But again, the first time we see an animated dinosaur. And in the same year, we actually see a dinosaur in a live action film. We see a ceratosaur show up in the movie called Brute Force, also known as The Primitive Man. Goes by either name. Brute Force, I believe, is the correct one, though. D.W. Griffith created this movie, and within that movie, he actually featured a ceratosaur. Now, this is not something like what you would see in Jurassic Park. Okay, the dinosaur just kind of sat there, moved forward, moved back, opened his mouth, closed his mouth, real exciting. Okay, but for the time, very innovative. It's the first time we see a dinosaur played or shown in a live action movie. The Lost World. Now, this is the original Lost World. Okay, not the one that just came out a couple of years ago. 1912, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote the original Lost World, which was made into a movie in 1925. Okay, and within that movie, there were dinosaurs, and those dinosaurs were actually animated, and you can see them moving around. Now, the animator was one Willis O'Brien. Willis O'Brien is probably one of the most well-known individuals when it comes to stop motion animation, because he really created the techniques that were used. Okay, in order to use stop motion animation, you got to have the figure, you take a picture, you then move it a little bit, you take another picture, you move it a little bit more, you take another picture. Get the idea. It can take you days just to create like 10 feet of film, because it's such a slow, painstaking process. But Willis O'Brien, yeah, he was real key in this type of motion. So in the Lost World, we saw a couple of different dinosaurs. Okay, we saw a tyrannosaur, saw the brontosaur, and then we also saw something that we at the time called Trachodon. Yeah, we recognize today Trachodon isn't actually a legitimate genera. It's been reclassified. But when you look at the animation, you can see how it's kind of herky-jerky. It's not nice and smooth like we see the CGI. But for 1925, that's pretty darn impressive. That is pretty darn impressive. And so, yeah, so this is the first time we really see good use of dinosaurs in a movie.
Does this have anything to do with the movie in like the 90s, maybe 95 or so, called The Lost World, Jurassic Park?
No, this has nothing to do with Jurassic Park. This particular book has been redone many times over the years. You can probably find at least 4 different remakes of Arthur Conan Doyle's work. Okay, but honestly, probably biased. I find this to be the most interesting one, just because it's so original and so groundbreaking for its time. And to see the work of Willis O'Brien. If you ever watched the original King Kong, in the original King Kong, Willis O'Brien did the animation. He animated the stegosaur and the tyrannosaur and King Kong himself. And remember, this is all done without computers. This is all done by just taking models and moving them a little bit and taking a picture. Again, very painstaking.
Right, so that animation is a brontosaurus fighting a T-Rex.
Yes.
Did they think that brontos were carnivorous or?
No.
Oh,
No, they did not. They figured it was just probably fighting back.
okay.
So, yeah, no, that's a good question. Now, when you do look at the teeth of a brontosaurus or a patasaur, really, you definitely can tell that it's definitely some form of an herbivore. So, yeah, but it's got to defend itself. And, you know, gotta get, you know, it's not gonna go down easy. Not gonna go down easy. 1930. We see these. And this is the first time we see mass-produced products displaying dinosaurs. So Cavender cigarettes sold, well, you know, cigarettes. And the cigarettes came in packages that were made out of paper. So they were very easy to squish. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to find a way to reinforce those packages. So what they would do is they would put cardboard in it. But then they realized, you know, if we're gonna put cardboard in here, we might as well make them interesting. So what they started to do is they created card series to put into the cigarette packets. So you buy a pack of cigarettes, and when you did that, you got a set of cards to go with it. And these cards are cool. Because when you actually you could buy a 3D viewer, and you could take these two cards and put them under the 3D viewer, and it would look three-dimensional. Pretty cool. And on the back, it's got all kinds of little information too, very important. But yeah, this is the first time somebody tried to do this. So their fourth series was dedicated to prehistoric creatures, mostly dinosaurs. Few non-dinosaurs, but mostly dinosaurs. So again, 1930. Good times. 1945, we see one of the very first dinosaur textbooks. Okay, now textbook like we use in college, more of a general science type of book. But by this point in time, people were becoming aware of the dinosaurs. And there was a lot of interest in the general public about, wow, what are these things? What can we learn about them? How can we learn more? So people started to write books dedicated to them. So in 1945, we see one of the earliest examples of a book dedicated to dinosaurs. Now, it's likely that this isn't the earliest one. I'm still working on figuring this out. I think there's one more that actually may have been from 1941. In 1945, though, we definitely had this particular book here by Edward Port. And again, really great description of all the different the dinosaurs, the environment that they lived in, what did they do, how do they make a living, so on and so on. Just a fascinating, really worth checking out. Now, through all of this, you notice that the one group that we haven't appealed to yet, kids, nice. 1947, that's where that happens. In 1947, you get your first toy dinosaurs, put out by Cellrite Gifts. Now these are fascinating, because they're really kind of cool looking, but also what they're made of. These are bronze lead. Okay, so one thing I know, please don't lick these, okay? Yes, these are actually bronze lead. Okay, so you gotta be really careful. Now, of course, at the time, you know, we weren't as cautious about things like that. Oh yeah, we use lead, no problem, right? Not the best of ideas. But these were sold by the American Museum of Natural History, and these are the first known examples of toy dinosaurs. Finally, suddenly realized, yeah, kids really like dinosaurs. Yeah, so why not sell them some toys? Well, by poisoning as a byproduct, why not? Again, those are some of the first ones that we see. First kid's book, The Shy Stegosaurus of Cricket Creek. Anybody ever read this? Nobody? Just me, I'm probably the only one, yeah. It's probably like the only copy in the world. No, I'm just kidding. Really good book. It's really a cute book. I mean, it's 1955. And Evelyn Sibley. So she wrote this. It's a story about a couple of young kids that get moved to a very isolated part of the country. It's very dry, very desert-like, and while they're wandering around, they find a stegosaur that's been hanging out for the past 65 million years. Really, it's more like 165 million years, but whatever. And so they befriend the dinosaur. He's very shy. They befriend him. And they decide that, I bet you if we brought you out in the public would love this. And the stegosaur like, no, I don't want that, because I'm afraid it's gonna hurt me. So eventually they decide they protect him and, keep him safe. But first time that we see a dinosaur used in a kid's book. Usually when I first started this, I thought it was gonna be like Danny and the Dinosaur. Who's read Danny and the Dinosaur? Okay, a couple of more. I thought that was gonna be the first one. You had to go back a little bit further though. Still love that book. Oh yeah, the Flintstones. Yeah, we mentioned them, didn't we? Yeah. Yes, off the cereal box, right, exactly. So in the 1960s, we had the first animated cartoon, first, I think that's kind of redundant, the first cartoon series that features dinosaurs. Doesn't it? Now you want to remember how this was drawn, how these were produced, just like the older cartoons, right? You have to do one frame at a time, right? Very difficult to do. But we created the first animated series. In the series of Flintstones, of course, we know that there were dinosaurs, right? You had Dino the dinosaur. He was the pet, right? You had the brontosaurus that helped Fred lift heavy loads in the quarry, right? Of course, you do run into a little issue that there's also a saber-toothed cat in there. Yeah, we got a little problem with that, right? Whatever. But yes, here we see actual, dinosaurs playing a pretty significant role in this particular series. The first dinosaur in a live-action TV series was actually out of Japan. Now, when I was growing up, I remember watching Land of the Lost and the Sleestaks, giant tyrannosaur. But you actually have to go a little further back in time to find the first dinosaur used in a live-action series. This is Kaiji Oji. Okay, out of Japan, which means monster prince. In this series, there's a young boy who adopts a dinosaur, a brontosaur-type dinosaur, and they have to fight off aliens. Yes, they had to fight. They had to make it interesting, right? Dinosaurs aren't interesting enough. Let's have them fight aliens. Yeah. Now, this series only lasted probably about 26 or 28 episodes. It wasn't a really super long run. But it's definitely the first time we see dinosaurs in live action in a TV series. Kind of cool. Kind of cool. Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons action here. In this series, in this game, which was created in 1974, if you went through what was called the monster, or what is called the monster manual, described all the monsters you could fight in Dungeons and Dragons. Well, in that book, there are dinosaurs. So you can end up fighting off a Tyrannosaur, Triceratops, a Stegosaur, a Plesiosaur. There's a whole bunch of other ones. Now, the thing is that when you read it, and you talk about the dinosaurs, it'll also list Ichthyosaur, Plesiosaur, Tylosaur, pterodactyls. Not dinosaurs. But that's okay. Yeah, we still are working on that. But yes, this is the first time we see dinosaurs used in a game, a very significant game, right? Which we still play today. Now, in the 1980s, there was a major breakthrough, a major rethinking about what dinosaurs were like. Up to this point in time, dinosaurs were thought to be cold-blooded. They were sluggish. They had to live in the water so they could float. They had to eat soft vegetation because their teeth and jaws were too weak. It's amazing that these things even survived. Yeah. Robert Bacher, Adrian Desmond, the two of them wrote a couple of books in the 1980s, which changed our thinking about dinosaurs. We started to realize they weren't cold-blooded. They weren't sluggish, okay? They were probably agile, fast, able to cover great distances by running and whatnot. Revolutionary thinking. Robert Bacher, he's probably the more well-known one. He actually started his work back in the 60s under the work of John Osborne. And finally, in 1986, he actually wrote his book, The Dinosaur Heresies. Now, what's interesting is the idea of a warm-blooded dinosaur actually goes back to Owen when he first described dinosaurs. He actually thought there was a chance that they were warm-blooded. He looked at the dinosaurs that he was finding. He compared them to reptiles. He knew that reptiles had 4-chambered hearts. And he was like, well, you know, crocodiles have a 4-chambered heart, and they live in the water. And those 2 extra chambers provide a little extra oxygen so they can stay underwater longer. Well, if you have a 4-chambered heart and you're terrestrial, well, you don't live underwater. So that means that you don't need that extra oxygen just to survive underwater. Instead, that oxygen could be used for extra activity, indicating they were maybe warm-blooded. The idea didn't take though. Most people thought dinosaurs were reptiles, so as a result, they had to be slow, they had to be slow. And that line of thinking kind of made its way through time until the 80s, when we finally realized, yeah, probably not. Probably not. Michael Crichton took advantage of that. Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park, used the idea of warm-blooded dinosaurs and changed a lot of thinking as a result. In Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs were portrayed as warm-blooded. As a result, they were faster, they were agile, they were intelligent. There are indications that dinosaurs were way more intelligent than we give them credit for. Well, Jurassic Park kind of helped to promote that idea right after Walker published his ideas. And then, of course, how many of you have read Jurassic Park? Okay, one, okay, a couple, okay, thank you, everyone. That's good. But who's seen Jurassic Park? Okay, a few more hands there, okay. Yeah, all right. That's okay, no judgment, no judgment.
Who owns Jurassic?
Yeah, there you go.
Voice for Jurassic Park.
So, when the movie was made, that was one of the significant changes, is that, again, the dinosaurs were made what would probably be considered to be more realistic. They were fast, right? They were aggressive. I mean, that's still questionable. But they definitely had the ability to run and to jump and do things that people didn't think dinosaurs beforehand would have been capable of. And so, yeah, we see a very different portrayal. Plus, we also have the advantage of CGI. Let's be honest. Trying to do that in stop motion, yeah, good luck. But CGI definitely allows us to do that. In the 1990s, big discovery, dinosaurs had feathers. Beforehand, dinosaurs were thought of as being scaly, right? It's covered with scales or nodules, something like that. But feathers, yeah, no. Now, we knew that feathers existed. I mean, besides modern birds, of course. We knew they existed in the fossil record. We go back to 1861 and find fossils of an organism called Archaeopteryx. And Archaeopteryx, which was preserved in a nice shallow pool of water, okay, landed in the water, kind of settled in, got gradually buried, and preserved feather structures. So we knew dinosaurs existed in the fossil record. And Archaeopteryx is from back in the Jurassic, so we knew they were from quite some time back. In the 1990s, we found evidence of feathers on dinosaurs. This is Sinosciopteryx. And when you look at it, you see how it's got that black coating all around it. When we first saw that, what we thought was, oh, that's probably just with a skin rod. That's just a carbon print. Well, we looked at it more closely, and what we realized is that those are feathers. And if you look closely, you can see how it's dark here, not dark there, dark here, light there, dark there, light there, dark, and so on and so on. This thing didn't just have feathers, but it had feathers of different colors. Whoa, that's major, okay? So out of China, that's really where we find a lot of these fossils. So there's our example of Sinosciopteryx. So we realized that dinosaurs had feathers. In 1998, book here by Greg Bear, Dinosaur Summer. The dinosaur on the cover is portrayed with feathers. Just a couple of years after those discoveries. So this worked its way into popular culture pretty quickly. So yeah, this is actually a fake dinosaur. If you've read this book is actually a continuation of The Lost World. Okay? takes place about 30 years after that. Possible. Takes place after that. But the dinosaurs, some of the dinosaurs were made up. They don't actually exist. So, anyways, feathers. Are those dinosaurs?
CGI?
Nope, those are actual images of what we think dinosaurs look like. Not the real thing, of course, but this is what we actually think the dinosaurs look like, and it even shows coloration. Okay, so you get this guy here, Microraptor. What's interesting about Microraptor is it had 4 wings. You know, it does look like a bird, doesn't it? And guess where birds come from? Bingo, you got it. And there's some good evidence for it, right? But Microraptor had wings on the front, but its rear legs also had wings. Something we don't see today. But you notice that the wings are blue. Is that just made up? Not really. We actually can now look at the feathers of dinosaurs, and we can actually start to interpret coloration based on the shapes of the cells and the types of melanin that those cells can hold. So we realize that these are not totally out in left field, okay? Sinosciopteryx, okay, actually probably did have a stripe-like pattern. I think it looks like a lemur. Yeah. Does it make sense? It kind of does. I mean, we see the color pattern today. Why wouldn't we see it in the past? It kind of works.
All right, so Sino, I can absolutely get behind being a dinosaur.
Okay.
Microraptor, we defined a dinosaur as being terrestrial,
Yes.
and Microraptor has wings, so it flies.
So we are starting to look at that transitional period. And that's the thing. I mean, when we start thinking about birds, now, at what point did they diverge from the theropods? It's kind of hard to tell that exact point in time. So for our purposes now, we'll kind of call it a dinosaur, but yeah, it's probably a little bit close to a bird. But again, so this all comes out of a really neat book also. If you've ever get a chance, I would suggest picking this up, because this shows different dinosaurs as they appeared, color-wise, size-wise. I mean, absolutely fascinating, some of the reinterpretation. There's a pterodactyl on the front. That doesn't look anything like a pterodactyl picture that we're familiar with. Yeah, exactly. Look at the head, right? You get the bone going back, but instead we have some kind of a fleshy type of formation there. Completely changes our thinking. A very interesting read. Jurassic World Dominion, 2022, just not last year. Well, when they did this movie, what did they do differently? Feathers. If you saw the movie, you saw the first portrayal of feathered dinosaurs. So it didn't take long for this to work its way into pop culture. So Morris Intrepidus, that's the one that's up here, and you can see how it's got a little bit of downy covering there. Some little tiny feathers. But then you get this thing that we call a pyroraptor. I had to look it up to make sure this was legitimate, to make sure it wasn't something they were just making up. It's legit. Feathers. And the therizinosaur, also probably feathers. So, what's next? What new discovery are we going to find that is going to change our perception? I have no idea.
I think it's
What?
English.
Huh?
Talk like in the movies.
We'll see what happens. We will see what happens. So, thank you. Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I have it on good authority that you're working on a book about
Yes.
dinosaurs.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
So this is the first step in, I have a sabbatical at my job for next semester. Where I'm going to be working on a book that looks at exactly this topic, but it goes into a lot more depth. So I'm going to be looking at things like behavior. Right? When we look at dinosaurs again, we have that portrayal that dinosaurs are vicious brutes that just kill everything. Is that realistic? Probably not. How do we know? Look at modern organisms. So that's one of the things I do want to look at. Coloration. I want to go into a little bit more about it, that and how their skin looks. So there's a few things that I'm going to look at. So yeah, so the idea is to have a book written, probably in the next year or so. Stay updated, I'll let you know.
Is there any evidence that they're either social or solitary or some sort of those?
In some combinations, yes. In some situations, we certainly can find large deposits of dinosaurs together. Now, we got to be careful about that because sometimes it could be like a mapped death site. We have one instance of, so what we have are what are called Lagerstättens, and a Lagerstätten is just basically a giant deposit of bone. And there's at least one instance we know of over in, I want to say in Colorado, where there are several hadrosaur type, that might be myosaurs, but there's a whole bunch of them that all died together. And people are like, oh, they were social. Well, no, if you look at the bones are actually all lined in the same direction. So they probably got caught in some kind of a mass flood and then decomposed, had another flood, which kind of aligned those bones. But there are other instances where we can see, like myosaur. Myosaur, we certainly can see myosaur around nests. And so it definitely is a strong indication that they probably had some form of social behavior. So yeah, it's probably going to depend on which one we look at. You look at modern cats. Some cats are social, some are not. Can we say the same thing about dinosaurs? Probably. Probably.
Two things. One, on Facebook, there is a never too old for dinos hashtag.
And never what?
Never too old for dinos, which I found hilarious.
Yes.
Second, what is your favorite dinosaur? What does it say about you?
My favorite dinosaur is Chasmosaurus,
Okay.
which is a form of a ceratopsid. It's one of the horned dinosaurs. I don't know what it is about it, but I love the frill. It's got these nice protrusions of the occipitals. I just, I love them. I just love the way it looks. So yeah, that's my favorite. I like horned dinosaurs. I think theropods are overrated. Tyrannosaur, Allosaur, come on. Everybody likes them.
So does Jurassic World Dominion have anything to do with Jurassic Park?
Yes, they're all in the same franchise. So it's all supposed to be based on the whole idea of Island Nublar, where the whole thing started. And that's why in a lot of those, they'll actually kind of a little bit of an Easter egg. They'll kind of go back to the original island and find stuff. So yeah, they're definitely all linked in the same franchise. Yeah. Good. Oh, okay, that's a thumbs up, okay.
I have a question,
Yes.
and I don't know if she's being serious.
Okay.
Your older sister's asked Mark the origin of dragon.
Dragon what?
I'm sure it's from
No, dragon ass, yeah, okay. That's just when you go really, really slow, right? You're dragging it.
Stop it. Oh, that was from Stu.
I didn't say it out loud.
Yes, you did, I got it.
No, you had to. La 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 la, right?
Nothing is that this
So getting back to that initial classification of dinosaurs,
Yeah.
Things that are legs underneath them and exist on legs.
Right.
Plesiosaurs are not dinosaurs, pterosaurs are not dinosaurs.
Right.
How closely related are those two to proper dinosaurs?
Not super close. I mean, they do share a common ancestor called an archosaur, where they all kind of diverge from. But you have to go back quite some time to find that diverging point. So pterosaurs are considered flying reptiles, and that's it. They're not birds. They're not related to birds. They're not related to bats or anything else. They're their own unique class, and they all went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. And the same thing for the marine reptiles. They all went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. They're not related to crocodiles or tortoises or anything like that. They were their own group, and they are now gone.
So is it wrong to think of birds as modern day dinosaurs?
No, absolutely not. We would want to be more specific and say that they're avian dinosaurs. That we can work with. But yeah, if you say modern day dinosaurs, I'll know what you're talking about. Okay. All right, well, again, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. If there's anybody in here who's under the age of 18, and you see a dinosaur up here you like, it has to be a dinosaur though. I'm just kidding. You feel in one of those picture interests, come up and grab one.